Welcome back to another episode of my Wheel of Time reread on Reading the Pattern. We'll be talking about The Eye of the World, chapters 44 through 47, in which we realize that when something freaks Moiraine out, we should all be terrified.
This video may include spoilers for all Wheel of Time books. If you have not finished reading the series and do not want to be massively spoiled, stop here or proceed at your own risk.
Now, for the first time, we begin traveling by unconventional means that cannot be traced on a map. The group enters a waygate in Camelin and travel dark and strange paths that take them to another waygate in Fal Dara.
Let's review the notebook of our favorite Ogier to remind ourselves what happened in these chapters.
Master Gil helps the group sneak out of the inn and gives them horses from his stables. Matt notices that Perrin is acting odd, but Rand attempts to reassure him that Perrin is fine. The group conceals their departure from the inn and makes their way through the dark streets, following Loyal's sense of where the waygate must be located. They are occasionally noticed, especially as the sky begins to get lighter, but they find their way to a cellar where the waygate must be located, and Moiraine is able to get them in without difficulty.
She also knows how to work the waygate, and one by one they make their way through into total darkness.
The group travels on horseback with lantern light, and Loyal leads them along bridges to guidings that he is able to decipher to find the correct path. They continue on from bridges to islands to guidings and so on, eating on horseback, until they come to a bridge that ends in a jagged gap. They pause at the gap, with Moiraine needing to encourage and insist that Loyal help them backtrack and find an alternate path to Fal Dara. Eventually, they stop for the night on one of the islands. Moiraine, trying to cheer up the downhearted group, tells them that she does not believe Tom is dead because he is part of the pattern. This leads to Min, which leads to Matt and Perrin ribbing Egwene and Rand over Min, Aram, and Elsgrinwell until both Egwene and Rand nope out of that conversation. After continuing on the next day, Lan announces that someone is following them, but they decide to leave whoever it is alone. At a guiding, Moiraine notices Trolloc runes and deduces that the ways are how Trollocs have been showing up undiscovered in unexpected places like the Two Rivers. Shortly thereafter, they find a group of Trollocs who have died horribly on a destroyed bridge.
They continue on until they are 2 bridges away from their destination, and Rand notices wind.
Loyal, panicking, announces it must be Machin Shin. They race for it and make it to the waygate, but it is missing the Avendasora leaf needed to operate it. Moiraine is forced to channel to cut a way out, and then Lan's horse Mandarb charges to break open the gate. They make their way out and catch a little bit of the horrific whispers that the black wind makes, but it is unable to follow them out of the ways. They have arrived in Shinar, a few miles from Fal Dara, where it is still dangerously cold, but to Borderlanders, a fine spring. As they head towards Fal Dara, they pass empty farms. Rand once again tries to convince Egwene, Nynaeve, and Loyal that they don't have to continue all the way on to the Eye with the rest, but Nynaeve cuts him off. As they approach the walls of Fal Dara, Lan warns them of the rule that no one may wear a hood to hide their face in borderland towns, so that they cannot be confused with a Myrddraal.
Lan and Loyal are greeted with great eagerness by the Shinarans. A man named Ingtar takes them to Lord Agomar, who rules in Fal Dara.
In Agomar's study, he greets Moiraine, Lan, and Loyal with great honor, but it's clear that he expects they have come to assist with the Shinaran battle against the Shadow, which is brewing in Tarwin's Gap. He is shocked to learn of their plan to head for the next day straight for the Blight and to take the young Emmonsfielders with them to attempt to reach the Eye of the World. Ingtar interrupts to tell them of a mad stranger who is attempting to get into the town. When the man is brought to them, it turns out to be Padan Fain. And although Agomar is ready to dismiss him as a madman for his ravings, Moiraine quickly realizes how dangerous he is and insists on questioning him alone with Lan. Rand anxiously waits with his friends while Moiraine and Lan question Fain. Lord Agomar entertains Nynaeve and Egwene and tells them highlights of Lan's history as the uncrowned king of the lost country of Malkir. Moiraine and Lan return, and Moiraine fills them in on the sordid and disturbing history of Padan Fain, who has been a dark friend for more than 40 years, and is now something even worse.
They learn that it was Fain who brought Shadowspawn to the Two Rivers, as well as the history of how Fain became a Hound of the Dark One, compelled to seek out Rand, Mat, and Perrin at all costs.
Including following them into Shadar Logoth and through the Ways, where the Black Wind caught him and then fled. Moiraine has not learned all from Fain, but she will not rest more than one night before heading straight for the Eye. Agomar wishes to send experienced men with Moiraine in place of Rand, Mat, and Perrin, and she shocks him when she tells him that it is the 3 young men who will fight the battle at the Eye, because they are Ta'Viren, and she will not have anyone else.
Let's take a look at all the fascinating details and hints of what is to come in Robert Jordan's master plan.
We get a first passing mention of Shiriam Sedai, an Aes Sedai who we later learn is of the Blue Aja and Mistress of Novices, and much later learn is actually Black Aja. There's nothing that Moiraine says here that tells us very much about Shiriam, but the fact that she mentions her as someone that Basilgil could reach out to might indicate that she has some trust for Shiriam. Given that Moiraine seems to trust very few people, this is a bit curious in hindsight, but then again, it's possible that Moiraine is just mentioning her as a fellow member of the Blue, and knowing Moiraine, she remains pretty guarded with just about everyone. Loial actually gets angry when he sees the Waygate, to know that the grove that once surrounded it was destroyed, and the Waygate now exists in a basement. This gives us an indication of how formidable Ogier are if you manage to rile them. You don't want to do that. And it also tells us what manages to push Loial even that far, namely the destruction of beautiful natural things. In the Ways, Rand casually invites Loial to the Two Rivers when this is all over. And Loial replies, "You believe this will ever be over, Rand?" This is a lovely, subtle hint of how expansive this story is going to be, and even of the cyclical nature of time, where nothing is ever really over. Loial, being more clued in to matters of the pattern and Ta'Viren than most, senses this. When Moiraine is forced to channel to get them out of the Ways, we see that her staff is actually ruined by the corruption, and she throws it away. She never ends up getting another one, and her use of a staff as an aid to concentration when channeling ends here. It's not something we see other Aes Sedai doing either. Perhaps it was a crutch that she no longer needed. I see it as sort of a symbolic shedding of one of the things that really links Moiraine to Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings. Going forward, these homages to Tolkien will become less, and Moiraine as a character, as well as the Wheel of Time, head off in new directions. When the group is debating how long a farm has been abandoned, we get a clear hint of Perrin's wolfishly good eyesight when he notices the amount of rust on a scythe that Rand certainly can't see. And Perrin doesn't seem aware of this yet either. In the briefest of interactions between Rand and Egwene, when she seems worried that he will hold her dancing with Aram against her, we get a reminder that these two are still sweet on each other. But Rand immediately remembers Min's viewing, and it's another reminder that love is not in the future for these two. This is our first introduction to Ingtar, who will be a hugely important character in the next book. Our first impression of Ingtar is that he seems overly confident about the Shienaran force's chances against the Shadow. This is a fascinating first impression because we will finally come to realize, with shock, that Ingtar actually turned to the Shadow out of despair. We even get a mention in these chapters of the adage, "No man can stand in the shadow so long that he cannot find the light again." Egwene mentions this in regards to Fane, but it's actually Ingtar who is the only true example of this saying that we ever really get. We find out in these chapters that Moiraine has actually seen the Green Man once before. And even though you're not supposed to be able to find him more than once, Moiraine is confident that she will be able to because of how great their need is. We never actually find out when and why Moiraine was able to find him before. We can only speculate that it may have happened sometime in between New Spring and the Eye of the World, and that it had to do with her quest to find the Dragon Reborn. We get so many references to the Golden Crane of Malkir. Actually, seeing the Golden Crane raised is something we're going to have to wait a long time for, but it is beautifully set up here as one of the central conflicts for Lan's character throughout the story. Also in the recitation of Lan's history, we get our first hint of one of the origins of Slayer, and that's Lan's cousin Isam. At this point, we only know that Isam was an infant when his mother attempted to flee with him and she was killed. No one knew what happened to him. But since we later find out the sad reality of his childhood in the Blight, I actually find this part heartbreaking, despite the horrific nature of what he becomes. We learn that Ba'alzamon has also appeared to Fane, and this time not in a dream, but the waking world, though his image only flickers.
This should be another hint that Ba'alzamon is not the Dark One. For if the Dark One could appear, even briefly or with an avatar, the world would be far worse off than it currently is. Agomar even comments to the effect.
And it's possible that Moiraine already suspects this, as she only comments that Fane believed Ba'alzamon was the Dark One. Agomar also questions if Rand, Mat, and Perrin can channel once he finds out that they will be fighting the battle at the Eye. Even though Moiraine neatly sidesteps this by telling him they are Ta'veren, this is a pretty huge clue of what we're going to find out in only a few chapters. Rand also doesn't fail to notice that Moiraine specifically says almost all of them have the old blood of Manetheren, and this is another clue that it is Rand who stands out among the three of them.
Let's discuss the central themes and focal points that these chapters are woven around.
So let's talk about corruption. More specifically, the idea of something being changed and debased from its original state and purpose. We see that happening with a lot of things in these chapters, first and most obviously being the ways, which have been corrupted by the Dark One's touch on Saidin, which had been used to make them in the first place. In this case, the corruption is gradual and at first subtle. It makes me wonder what exactly those first hints of corruption in the ways look like, and how long did people continue to use them even after those probably unsettling signs started to appear. At this point, the corruption is undeniable and touches everything that enters it. Moiraine fears to channel, knowing what it will do to her weaves. And when she finally does, we see that her flames appear sickly and sooty with acrid smoke, and that they actually destroy something physical, her staff, in the process. When Moiraine refuses Agomar's offer of men to escort their party through the Blight, she refuses on the grounds that she could never be sure that one among them would not be seeking glory. The idea then that even a hint of corruption or wrong intention among their party could be enough to doom their mission. We know then that among this group, at this point, there is no hint of corruption, even among those that Moiraine did not seek out to join them. That means Egwene and Nynaeve and Loial are as pure of heart as the rest, and Moiraine is sure of that. It's also a hint of Moraine's own pure intentions, which we are given some cause to doubt, but wrongly so. When we are given the history of the fall of Malkir, the most heartbreaking part to me was the role that corruption played among a great people that ultimately led to their downfall. After the death of Lan's uncle Lane, his widow Brea falls prey to it, perhaps out of grief, along with a one-time hero, Cowan Fairheart, and their own plotting and personal desires for power ultimately leaves Malkir vulnerable to the doom that it will fall to. Finally, we have the ultimate example of corruption taken to its logical extreme in the person of Fane. First corrupted as a dark friend and later by a different evil, Mashadar, he is at this point foul enough that Moraine is filled with loathing and disgust at even touching him. And she is one unflappable woman, so if she is shook, we should all probably be cowering at the mere thought of coming face to face with him.
Let's break down the characters and their defining moments in these chapters.
I want to talk about how our understanding of Lan's character deepens once we learn of his history, and also how Nynaeve reacts to learning of it. We learn that Lan should have been a king, and that throughout the Borderlands, he is regarded as one, even though he has no crown or throne or even lands of his own. All he would have to do is state a claim, raise a flag, and people would follow him, but he chooses not to.
Certainly there seems to be some heartbreak in that decision, some despair, and the loss of his family and his lands, and a sense of hopelessness in the fight to reclaim Malkir.
We learn that his childhood as an orphan involved being raised by fighters, learning how to fight and to survive in the Blight above all else. This honestly breaks my heart to think of any child being raised knowing only death and the fight against the shadow. The oath that his parents swore over him is a burden that he bears every day, and it's clear in his refusal to actually raise the Golden Crane that he sees his fight as fatal, and he resists the responsibility of leading others to death. It's interesting that he did swear himself to Moraine, and it raises a lot of questions that we don't really get answers until New Spring, when we see how they came together. We do see how painful it is for him to refuse Agomar's repeated requests to join the fight at Tarwin's Gap when he destroys a goblet. The fact that he holds firm to Moraine's plan, when it's clear that part of his heart is drawn elsewhere, shows how important he believes her fight is and how seriously he takes his oath to her. Since we have Rand's perspective during this, we don't exactly know what Nynaeve is thinking, but we do see that Rand notices she listens with rapt attention, that she is wide-eyed and stares into her cup with face drained of color. Egwene has to comfort Nynaeve, and understandably so. Nynaeve is slowly realizing that she is falling in love with Lan. And even though he's a warder to Moraine, clearly he's been flirting with her, and she may have had some hope that he would return her feelings.
These revelations would seem to deal a serious blow to that hope, with Lan being described as all but wedded to death.
Not only that, but there's got to be some intimidation in learning that the man you love is a king when you're a woman from a small village in the middle of nowhere. Granted, Nynaeve is a leader among her own people and a rightfully proud woman, but it's still got to be a shock and to cause some deep doubts about the feelings she's been developing. At the same time, she gets nothing but confirmation that Lan is fully worthy of the esteem she holds him in, so that's not going to do anything to dampen her feelings for him, and it puts her in an even more difficult position.
Let's talk about what we need to know about the Dark One and all of his minions and followers.
We've taken a break from the Shadow for the past couple of episodes, but it's back with a vengeance in this one. First, we have to acknowledge that the effect the Shadow has had on the Ways makes them truly nightmare-inducing. The Ways, with their paths like an Escher painting and the fact that time and distance are different, would already be a bit head-spinning. But add in total oppressive darkness, paths visibly breaking down, and the Black Wind, and nope, no wonder Loyal has to be practically dragged kicking and screaming in there. There are a couple of particularly interesting points about the Ways that I want to mention. First, when they find the Dread Trollocs, Moraine speculates that there might have been traps set for Shadow Spawn by the men who had created the Ways. It gives a fairly reassuring explanation for what otherwise is pretty unsettling.
Then there's Machin Shin, which howls with literal, hidden voices, filled with an unquenchable thirst for living things, filled with a hunger for pain, filled with frustration.
Listening to it would be enough to freeze anyone's blood without even knowing what it could do to your soul. We only get theories about what exactly the Black Wind is and where it came from. Moraine throws a bunch of them at us, but we never actually get an explanation for what it is. But even given this brief exposure to it, we then shortly thereafter learn that it caught up with Thane and then let him go because some of the voices were akin to him and others afraid of him. Yikes, this makes Thane even more frightening, along with the recitation of what the Dark One has done to him and what he did in the Dark One's service. This is when we finally start to understand Fane, if we can even still call him that. The abrupt changes in his manner as he's speaking to Agomar tell us that already he has two personalities housed in his body. The Fane personality speaks with a Lugarder accent and grovels pathetically. Then there's the arrogant, commanding, sleek voice that we will come to understand is the Mordeth personality that he acquired in Shadar Logoth. The frequent mentions of Fane as something worse and something more than a dark friend also hint at his unique status in the shadow.
And now, let's find a little levity amidst the darkness.
I actually found a fair amount of potential for humor in these chapters, surprisingly, including Loyal constantly berating himself for getting involved with Aes Sedai, but then continuing on anyway. And then Rand's reaction to getting poetry out of Lan. The man is an onion. But the best by far is the whole scene in the Ways, when Perrin and Mat team up to get the best of Egwene and Rand over their various flirtations while they were separated. First, Perrin takes Egwene down a peg by bringing up Aram, and just as Rand is feeling smug, Mat chimes in with, "Don't forget about Els Grinwell." I love everything about this whole exchange, and I can't wait to see the chemistry among this group in scenes like this in the show. Thank you again for continuing on with me in this reread journey of The Eye of the World. And there's only one episode left in this book, so be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss that last episode. There's also going to be plenty more content coming up after that for the Wheel of Time TV show and The Great Hunt. See you next time when we cover The Eye of the World chapters 48 through 53 and we finish the first book in the Wheel of Time.